Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. Hall of Fame wide receiver Michael Irvin had a fantastic comment earlier this year about the mindset of a player who is thinking about stepping away from the game. He said, if you're thinking about retiring, you've already retired. And in many ways, this is true. Once you put yourself in the mindset where you can just walk away at any time, and where you've mentally moved on from the game, it's really hard to snap out of it, especially if you've given so much of your time and energy to the game, and you feel like you haven't been rewarded in return. Which is what makes this upcoming story all the more remarkable. This is legendary Cincinnati Bengals defensive back Ken Riley. He seemingly defied the odds by playing the best football of his career at the end of it, saving the best for last, and playing it at an absurdly high level in the latter half of the 30s. You probably know of Riley as arguably the greatest defender in the history of the Bengals franchise. What you might not know is that his legacy could have been entirely different if he retired after the 1979 season, which is what he was seriously considering. After an abysmal year to close out the 70s, Riley was this close to hanging it up. Fortunately for everyone involved, he didn't. And this is the story behind the crazy ending to Ken Riley's storied NFL career. Before I talk about the incident in question, we need some context to understand just who Ken Riley is, how good he was, and why he was thinking about hanging it up once the 70s ended. Our story begins all the way back in 1969, when the Cincinnati Bengals drafted the Florida A&M player in the 6th round of the NFL Draft. This was somewhat of a risky pick, since Riley played quarterback in college, and head coach Paul Brown had no intention of playing Riley under center, because they already had a quarterback, having spent their first round pick on local man Greg Cook. Side note, Cook is one of the greatest what-ifs in the history of the NFL, because if he could have stayed healthy, who knows how his career would have turned out. Anyways, Brown decided to move Riley to the defensive side of the ball, and they had him play cornerback. How would Riley fare now that he was on defense? Safe to say, even though Paul Brown made a lot of great decisions with the Bengals, this might have been his best. Riley was thrust into his starting spot as a rookie, and by his second season in 1970, was starting every game for the team. Over his first 10 seasons, he started 134 games and recorded 43 interceptions. For some perspective, over that 10-year stretch from 1969 to 78, Riley was one of just 5 players in the NFL to have that many picks. And there were some amazing moments in there as well. He started every game for the Bengals during each of their 3 playoff seasons under Brown, as in 1970, 1972, and 1975, Riley was there for all 14 games. He finished first in the AFC and second in the league in interceptions in 1976 when he had 9, which trailed only Monty Jackson of the Los Angeles Rams, who had 10. And he was a big part of a handful of top 5 passing defenses. Even though Riley never made a Pro Bowl over those first 10 seasons, he received tons of praise from other players around the league and from media outlets. The Associated Press named him a second-team All-Pro during the 1975 and 1976 season, and many players considered him one of the top cornerbacks in football. Just to put into perspective how good he was for the Bengals franchise, which was still in its infancy, by the end of the 1978 season after 10 years, he had 43 interceptions, which was the most of any player in franchise history. Only one other player even had more than 20 at this point. Riley was on another level. But in 1979, it seemed like everything was about to come crashing down. The Bengals have had a ton of bad seasons in the history of their franchise, but you can make the argument that the 1979 season was the worst one of them all. If it's not the worst, it's definitely up there. This was a team in turmoil, a team in complete dysfunction, and a team that looked downright incompetent at times. They started the season off on a 6-game losing streak. In one of the games, a 51-24 loss to the Buffalo Bills, not only did the Bengals give up a 50-burger to an atrocious offense that would be held to 7 points or less in 6 games that season, but they gave up 4 second-half touchdowns to Roland Hooks, a man who scored a combined 3 touchdowns in his first 4 seasons, and a man who would only score twice more that season. The only good thing about the Bengals that season was their stunning 34-10 upset at home against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I talked about that shocking blowout in a previous video of mine, so if you want to learn more about how that game went, then click the card in the upper right corner. Everything else? A complete disaster. They finished the season 4-12. There were feuds between head coach Homer Rice and some of the players, one of which came after their second meeting against the Steelers, where in a 37-17 loss, Rice then said that the Steelers weren't that intense, to which the players, from Ken Anderson to Gary Burley, wholeheartedly disagreed, with Anderson saying, "They must have been pretty intense. We got clobbered." They allowed an abysmal 26.3 points per game, finishing with the worst scoring defense in football, and being the only team in the AFC to allow more than 400 points over the course of the season. The Bengals seemingly hit rock bottom. And among the disappointments from that 1979 campaign was none other than Ken Riley. He had the worst season of his career. He had just 1 interception, which was his lowest single-season total ever. He was part of a pass defense that ranked second to last in yards allowed, second to last in touchdowns allowed, and last in yards per attempt. And while I'm not sure that he necessarily thought he was done, he thought that the Bengals were done. They were going nowhere, and he didn't want to be around for it anymore. All these years playing the game with the same team, and he had no playoff wins to show for it. With that in mind, Ken Riley, after his 11th season in the league, was ready to hang it up. In a retrospective interview, Riley would say how all he really cared about was playing 5 seasons in the league. The 5th year was the year that a player received his pension, and that was a big deal for him, and understandably so. But after the 5th year, he was going to take it on a year-by-year basis. If he wasn't feeling it anymore, or he felt like the team was going nowhere, he would hang it up and call it a day. And you can bet after that 1979 season that he was thinking about doing exactly that. Riley said, "We had just finished back-to-back 4-12 seasons. It was very discouraging. It's hard work staying in shape, and you have to do it all year round. You start to wonder, where did I go wrong? What's happening?" Especially after everything he went through, and with how bad the Bengals looked, he was moments away from retiring and was heavily leaning in that direction, to say the least. That's when he got a lifeline when Homer Rice was fired and replaced with Forrest Gregg. It's not the first time I've talked about Gregg, as I did a video on the bizarre ending to his coaching career with the Cleveland Browns, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But after some time in Cleveland, he was ready for his second chance. And once Riley spoke to Gregg, Gregg was able to convince him to not retire and to keep playing the game. At the very first meeting that Gregg had with all the players, as Riley said, he got up and let us know exactly what he was going to do and what he expected of us, right down to the smallest detail. That's exactly what Riley needed to see. Riley, along with a ton of the players, immediately respected Gregg because of that first impression. And after Riley talked with Gregg one-on-one and talked about team management, Riley decided to stay on board and was convinced that the Bengals were heading in the right direction. He was no longer going to hang it up. He was going to give it another shot and snap out of that retirement mindset. And to say that this paid off would be an understatement. Ken Riley is an absolutely weird player in the sense of his career trajectory. With a ton of great players, they wind up going out in one of two ways. They go out with a whimper, looking like a shell them forward with selves, and looking like a person who has been taken over by the undefeated monster that is Father Time. Or they go out on a high note, whether it's with a championship ring, or whether they want to call it quits before their decline. But Riley is one of the few who not only went out on a high note, but went out on a note better than anything he'd ever had before. It would almost be the equivalent of Tom Brady retiring after a 60-touchdown season. Yes, we knew he was good, but man, he not only saved his best for last, but he did something almost unprecedented. And that's what Ken Riley did. Riley played that 1980 season and once again got back on track, as even though the Bengals were 6-10, he, along with the pass defense, saw a noticeable improvement from what happened in 1979. Riley would play 4 more seasons under Gregg, going from 1980 to 83, and at that time, recorded an incredible 21 interceptions and 3 pick sixes. He had more pick sixes at the age of 35 and above than he did prior to that age, which somewhat defies logic. He received a first-team All-Pro nomination in 1983 at the age of 36, which was the first and only time he received this award, and he did that after an 8-interception season, which was the most of any player in the AFC and was second in the NFL, only behind Mark Murphy of Washington. For reference, Riley was the only player in the history of the NFL at the time to have at least 8 interceptions in a season past the age of 35. And Riley finally did what he always wanted to do, when in 1981, he accomplished every football player's dream and made it to the Super Bowl. Even though the Bengals would lose to the 49ers, the fact that Cincinnati got to its first Super Bowl in franchise history, especially since they had no playoff wins ever entering that season, was a remarkable accomplishment. Riley, who was about to retire because of how dysfunctional the organization was now an AFC champion with the same team 2 years later. His reaction, as you can expect, was one of amazement, saying, "I'm in another world. What we've done still hasn't sunk in. It's unbelievable what we've done." And because he played those 4 extra seasons, Ken Riley's legacy has improved tremendously. Had Riley retired after the 1979 season like he thought he was going to, he would have been remembered as a team legend, but likely nothing more than that. He had no real accolades to his name outside of a couple of second-team All-Pro nominations, and while having 44 interceptions is great by any metric and would still be the all-time franchise lead, he likely wouldn't be remembered by a lot of people outside of Cincinnati, as his interception total would be outside the top 60 lifetime. He would be remembered as a very good player, don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure there's too many fond memories of him outside of that generation of Bengals fans if he hung it up after 1979. But because he stayed until 1983, his legacy looks completely different. He finished with 65 interceptions, which is the 5th most in NFL history. For those wondering, everyone tied or ahead of him in this category is a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He played in 207 career games, which was the most of any player in Bengals history, and he's one of just 2 players in team history, alongside linebacker Reggie Williams, in that exclusive 200-game club. And just recently, he was inducted in the inaugural class alongside Paul Brown, Ken Anderson, and Anthony Munoz in the Bengals Ring of Honor. As of this video, he is the only defender in the ring. I would be stunned if he was in the inaugural class if his career ended right then and there in 1979. Whatever Forrest Gregg did to persuade Ken Riley to come back clearly worked, and everyone benefited from it. The Bengals got to go to a Super Bowl and taste greatness for the first time ever, and Ken Riley got to continue playing the game that he loved at a high level, and even a higher level than he ever did before, and he got to build on his already solid legacy with the team. It's crazy to think just how close Riley came to hanging it up and calling it a career. And then, not only did he come back, but he played insanely well. Ken Riley is arguably the greatest cornerback in Bengals history, and yet, we were moments away from never seeing what he was truly capable of. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9, and subscribe to 60-second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.